Hello and welcome to this special 190th birthday video on Planet, the first mainline express passenger locomotive. Planet, designed by Robert Stephenson, was delivered 190 years ago this week, and on her first run between Liverpool and Manchester completed the 30-mile journey in just 58 minutes, setting what was probably a land speed record. The original Planet had a working life of just over 10 years, being scrapped sometime in 1840. But a working replica was built in Manchester and first steamed in 1992, bringing the design back to life. Over 40 members of the class were built in the United Kingdom, a similar number were built in the United States, and at least a dozen were built in France and 2 in Russia. Incidentally, the replica of Planet was the first mainline express passenger locomotive to be built in Britain since 1960. Planet was a culmination of a 33-month development programme which began in 1828. Hers was an absolutely revolutionary design. Planet incorporated a modern locomotive boiler with the proper smoke box at one end, and the firebox was in the boiler shell at the other. She had a steam dome, J-pipe and internal steam pipe for thermal efficiency. She had proper frames, known as sandwich frames made from wood and iron, and used leaf springs, axle horns and hoard guides for the first time. She also had a crank axle, allowing for the use of horizontal cylinders for greater stability and speed. They were placed under the smoke box to keep them warm. She was fast, powerful, fuel efficient, and, if I may say so, drop-dead gorgeous. Part of Robert Stephenson's design criteria for the Planet class had been to make the locomotive more simple and more easily managed. He wrote that, "In their present complicated state, they cannot be managed by fools, and therefore they must undergo some alteration or amendment. Enginemen are not the most manageable class of beings. They perhaps want improvement as much as the engines." So what was this simplified means of working? Known as a Stevenson flying reverse, it consists of a pair of slip eccentrics mounted on a sleeve on the crank axle, one eccentric per valve. The eccentrics are mounted between a pair of cheek plates and are free to move from side to side between a pair of driving dogs clamped to the axle. They are set 90 degrees apart to provide fore and back gear. On each of the cheek plates is a curved slot, into which the elongated driving pin on the driving dog engages. These eccentrics are moved from side to side via a pedal and linkage on the footplate. When the foot pedal is engaged, fore gear is selected, and when it is disengaged, making a handy trip hazard, back gear is selected. The eccentric rods pass between the cylinders and terminate in drop hooks. These drop hooks can be raised and lowered from pins on a rocking shaft which runs across the front of the cylinders. With them lowered, they lock onto the pins, and when they are raised, they are disengaged. And this can be done using a lever on the footplate. Prominent on the footplate is a pair of levers, one for each valve. The handle on the left moves the left valve, and that on the right, the right-hand valve. Furthermore, the movement of the levers mirrors that of the valves themselves, so that when the left hand is forward, the left-hand valve is also forward, uncovering the rear port. These handles control the valve directly. Between the firebox and cylinder rocking shafts are a pair of parallel iron rods which directly drive the valve spindles. This means that when the eccentric rods are disengaged, the valves are free to be worked by hand. It all seems complicated, but in fact it's very simple in operation. This is the footplate of the replica of Planet. It's more involved than the 1830 original, with some 20th century mod cons. From left to right, we have the steam chest pressure gauge, something not present in 1830. The pair of valve levers, the whistle, regulator and 2 water gauges, and yes, Planet in 1830 had water gauge glasses. The steam supply for the blower and inject, both of which are modern innovations, and the boiler pressure gauge. So let's get the locomotive moving. First, the driver must select fore or back gear with the foot pedal. Then it must be driven on the handle, with the driver setting the valve timing by hand. This provides 100% cut-off, so maximum boiler pressure is admitted to the cylinders, very useful when starting a heavy load. Once the locomotive has begun to move and gain some momentum, then the eccentric rods can be lowered and locked into place so that the eccentrics work the valve. As the locomotive runs, the pair of valve levers waggle backwards and forwards, and it's best to stay clear of them. There's 3 tons of force behind each one, and they will definitely break your arm. It's one thing to have got the locomotive moving, but it's another thing entirely, especially when it has no brakes, to stop it. In order to stop the locomotive, we must put it in reverse. This is not as dramatic as it sounds, with the wheels spinning around throwing out sparks a la Casey Jones. In fact, it is quite gentle. Planet is a grand lady and does everything, usually, with grace and poise. The regulator is closed and the locomotive starts to slow. As it drops about 5 miles per hour, the foot pedal can be used to change gear. This shifts the eccentrics over and reverses the action of the valves and thus the steam in the cylinders. This means that when the regulator is gently opened, the steam is being used to create back pressure in the cylinders, which acts as an effective brake, bringing the locomotive to a stop, and it can even be held simply on the regulator. So let's put it all together. Planet is in forward gear and the eccentric rods are locked in position, and the driver has just opened the regulator. You can see the valve handle starting to waggle as she gently makes her way. She's beginning to accelerate, making her own way, taking her own time. She's a very grand old lady. She's not one of these modern newfangled express engines. She does everything with grace, poise and dignity. You can see why it's best to avoid the valve levers. As we approach the curve, the driver will start to slow down by closing the regulator. The now shut-off steam regulator is closed and the locomotive proceeding forward under its own momentum. He's now planning ahead where to stop her. You can see him getting ready to put Planet into reverse using the foot pedal. He's now put into reverse. Gently bring her to a stand by opening the regulator very gently to use the steam in the cylinders as back pressure. So that's been a quick look on how to drive Planet. It's actually much easier than it looks. It's a skill which had to be relearned with an often vertical learning curve when the Replica was steamed in Manchester in 1992. The project recreated not just a locomotive, but also the equally lost skills of driving, firing and locomotive management from the 1830s. I'd like to express my thanks to all of those who made this video possible, and I hope that you have enjoyed watching. If you have, please consider liking sharing and subscribing. And see you next time on Rail Story.